More lawyer talk, more scary. No, actually, this one I hope is a little less scary and a little bit more of just kind of the enlightening part, right? So this next module is about staying compliant, how to stay compliant. And I obviously, in my first talk, we talked a little bit more about what the threats are to you as a business owner in your industry. And some of those threats kind of piggyback into how you stay compliant. The biggest one is understanding the laws, right? So how many of you in the last year have read any laws on scope of practice, supervision, or licensure for your industry in your state? I won't tell anybody if you don't raise your hand. Okay, most of you, right? If you're not doing that, at least on an annual basis, again, you may miss things, right? As I said, it feels like daily laws change, or at least positions might change. There might be new statements from the board that governs, your providers or govern your clinic, right? If you have clinical licensure. So if you're not at least checking in on an annual basis, there's a good chance you're going to miss something, right? And again, it's not just scope of practice or supervision, licensure, but there's maybe some changes in employment law, or maybe there's some changes in how you interact with patients. So, making sure that you are, just checking in, whether it's doing it on your own. Again, all of these, changes in law, statutes, updates through your state senate, legislature, it's accessible. It's free to access. Or call a lawyer, right? Ask them to give you an update, right? Get on a newsletter. Maybe they're sending things out. Join an association that's going to send out updates and things like that. Legal compliance from the standpoint of understanding the laws that govern your clinic, your providers, your staff, I think is the number one way to obviously stay compliant. And then we'll get back into protocols, right? So how many of you have consent forms for social media purposes, right? To take pictures and use pictures, okay? How many of those consent forms are for you to use those pictures just for your own purposes, before and after, tracking, right? Does the consent form say that? Does that consent form also say that you can use those pictures or videos for marketing purposes? Yeah? Okay, how many of those consent forms say that you can not only use them for marketing purposes, which is going to generate business for you, but that when that patient signs over consent, they're not entitled to any sort of compensation, right? Okay, maybe you haven't come across that yet. I have. I've had plenty of people who have had consent forms. They've filmed a commercial or they've done some sort of video project, pictures on social media, and they're using that in a sale, as Audrey said, right? You've got good before and afters, and I didn't mean to call you out, Audrey. But you have good before and afters, right? And that might help you make a sale because this is somebody who's actually been here and you can see what's been done. Well, you depending upon the laws of your state, you may have someone come back and say, hey, you know what? I see you using this all the time. I know I consented to it for use marketing, but I want to be compensated. You're using my name, my image, my likeness. And you just never know what that might turn into. What if it's somebody who has some sort of large following, an influencer or a celebrity or whatever it may be, right? Say they do sign on to that. If your relationship with them isn't totally compliant and in line with what your state law requires as far as consent and what type of compensation they get or don't get, that could become an issue. So, making sure that your consent forms are compliant with state law, very important. How many of you on an annual basis completely audit your operations from top to bottom, everything? Not just look at the laws, but actually go through your documents, look at your employment agreements, look at how you, bring in a patient, how you prescribe to a patient, things like that. 1, 2, 3, a couple, right? So it's time consuming, but it goes back to the working on your business and not in your business. If you're not doing it annually, there's a good chance you're missing something. There's a good chance that you haven't updated your forms to say that, when someone signs on for consent, they're not going to get paid for it, right? It's a good time to do that, right? Go home after this and say, hey, let's look at our forms and check this out. Let's check out what our cancellation policy says, right? If we're deducting fees from an employee's compensation for some sort of, benefit that we pay to them, right? And maybe they're going to pay you back. Have you updated your policies with those employees to say, here's what we're going to do, and we're disclosing this now? Or you've changed your paid time off policy, right? So Heather brought up a lot of great things about how to incentivize, and it's equally as important to make sure that the follow-up to that is when you change a policy, across your entire business, that it applies equally, right? It applies to your employees equally and also to your patients. And then the one last piece that I want to talk about is in regards to kind of the hot topic of the last 6 to 8 months, which is weight loss drugs. So over the summer, there was a lot of chatter and activity on these weight loss drugs because there's been a shortage of the name brand pharmaceuticals, right? So I won't say them because I don't want to get in trouble, right? But there's name brand weight loss drugs. There's name brand drugs for all sorts of things. But at least in weight loss, there's a lot of compound pharmacies out there that can reproduce a drug in a certain way that mimics what some of these name brand drugs can do. These name brand drugs have spent a lot of time and money to not only get FDA approval for their drugs specifically, but they've also spent a lot of time and money on trademarks, maybe intellectual property, right? And they've spent a lot of time and money to market this. So when these drugs are on a shortage and you're now going to a compound pharmacy, you're using something that's not actually the name brand pharmaceutical, but you still might be using their name, or you might be using their logo. And that doesn't just go for pharmaceuticals, but it could be a device, right? Maybe it's a device that you used in the past and you're no longer using it. If you're still using or marketing a name brand, something that has trademark protection or FDA approval, but you're not actually using that product or device, or you're not actually giving it to your patient, you expose yourself to trademark infringement claims, right? Misappropriation, and all sorts of misadvertising laws as well. And you'll see, maybe not you specifically, but we've seen civil complaints, right, for damages on these trademark infringements. And we've also seen FDA come after people, both clinics and pharmacies, for using these products, these devices that they're not actually using. They're just marketing towards it, or they're misusing, or they're making promises that aren't actually within what the FDA says is appropriate. And so from a civil standpoint, and then the FDA, that could turn into potentially a criminal issue, right? So, double check your marketing materials, double check, website, social, things like that. Make sure that if you're no longer using that product, it doesn't say it on the consent form, it doesn't say it on your website, it doesn't say it on whatever, consult, paperwork, documentation you're handing over. Because I think the last thing you want to do is have a patient come in and maybe get injured or make a claim that they've got injured, report it, right? And it go all the way up the chain to all these different folks. Or, I'll tell you, these big companies, they have a lot of time, they have a lot of money, and they have a lot of lawyers that just scan the internet constantly for their logo, for their names, to see how people might be misappropriating it. Because what's happening is, it might seem harmless, but you've got their name on there, and there's a lot of brand recognition, and now you're drawing in patients, you're making money. So not only is it just the misappropriation of it, you're going to be liable to them for damages as well. So those are the, I think, top ways to stay compliant. Again, it's more work, it's more effort, I get it, but ultimately, as Heather was mentioning, you're putting a lot of time and effort into your business, and there's a lot of scary things, right? I think the last thing you want to do is get 6 years down the road, multiple locations, multiple treatment rooms, be booked out, only to find out that you've got these issues, these ticking time bombs that could pop up and again kind of cripple you. So focus on the investment in it, right? Whether it's with a lawyer or somebody who's going to help advise you, or you're going to spend the time to do it, a consultant, a business partner. Take the time. It's a little bit of effort for a lot of prevention. And when it comes to healthcare, again, it is the most highly regulated industry in the US, probably not the world, but definitely the US. And if you get it wrong, it's licensure issues, civil issues, trademark, FDA. So I leave you with that. Again, I'm here for some questions if anybody has anything now, and then I'll be here after as well. Yes? Sure.
So, what is your prediction of what might happen in the next 5 years with Texas being a delegation state and, like one of the doctors, presenters earlier mentioned, it's kind of like the Wild Wild West. You have people doing it right, but then you also have injectors doing it at home or in like JC salons, and mid-level practitioner has to be there 24/7 for it to be technically legal.
Mm-hmm.
Also, medical director, and these people are now having medical directors be from Houston or Dallas, and these companies that are basically pimping out these doctors.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so the question was essentially, how do I see the industry going as far as it being a bit of the Wild West, right? So lack of regulation, lack of following rules, whatever it may be. If you don't regulate yourself, you'll be regulated, and that would be the strictest of regulations, because at some point, lawyers are going to get more involved, and they're going to catch up to what's happening, and they're going to say, we don't like this. Public policy, it's not safe for patients, it's not safe for anybody, and we're going to push back as hard as we can. And that might really be from a board perspective, or it might be overall, from a healthcare perspective, new laws that govern that. So, I think the best thing, my prediction, I guess, is, something's going to happen. Either industries and clinics are going to aggregate and say, hey, we think this is the best possible route to go forward, right? This is a safe protocol. This is a safe way to do things. Or the state, is going to, or the boards are going to, regulate you and tell you how to do it. And then you're fighting, an uphill battle at that point, rather than trying to lobby and get things done in the way that, actually happen. Because I'll tell you, most lawyers, they don't know, most legislators, they don't know how you operate. They don't know what's, how your industry is different from a very traditional, healthcare practice or hospital setting, for example. Yep, absolutely. Anybody else? Yes. Yeah, so if you don't carry it, if there's other brands or other companies that make it or use a more generic, like neurotoxin, for example, right? Just using generic terms. I know that people recognize Botox and might say it, but the owners of that trademark of Botox probably don't like it because it dilutes their brand, right? So, for example, if you call a photocopy of something a Xerox, Xerox is the name brand, right? And it dilutes their brand. So they're always on top of that. You just sort of have to train, I think, patients and staff to say, here's the more generic name for it, and here's what we use. And they'll understand it. Great. All right. I'll be here for a little bit after if anybody has questions or wants to chat one-on-one, but thank you all. I really appreciate it. Best of luck with everything.